a neurosurgical resident at the University of Alberta Hospital, and she's combining her interests in neurosurgery, aerospace research, and crisis management technology to make a difference in the world. Through her work and studies, including research on a robot capable of performing neurosurgery, Shawna has established a niche in the field of space technology spin-offs for medical benefit. While a student at the NASA-backed Singularity University, she co-created emergency response software called Civiguard that leverages the prevalence of smartphones for disaster response. And the company that was formed to market the software was named one of Entrepreneur Magazine's 100 Brilliant Companies. In 2012, she was one of 5 medical students chosen by the Canadian Space Agency for a 4-week program at NASA's Space Science Center in Houston, and she created a medical workstation there to deal with emergencies. She has also served as vice president at Edmonton Shine, an inner-city free clinic for at-risk youth. Please welcome our last speaker this evening, Shawna Pandya.
Hello and welcome to our bicentennial celebration. I am Dr. Shawna Pandya, and it is my extreme pleasure to be taking you through the past 100 years tonight. Personally, I thought it would have made more sense to look ahead 100 years to the year 2215, but this is just what I was asked to do, so in the spirit of the night, I am dressed in 2015 regalia. So let's get to it. Now, in order to understand the past 100 years, I want to give you a sense of what the world was like in 2015. This was a time when companies like Terrafusia and Aeromobile were pioneering the world's first flying cars. Amazon was pioneering drone delivery, and an Italian neurosurgeon had proposed the world's first head transplant. University of Washington researchers were experimenting with telepathy using an EEG and wireless connection. Meanwhile, 3D printing was well on its way. 3D printing for food, 3D printing for space, 3D printing for organs. And Back to the Future fans finally had their heyday when the world's first working prototype of a hoverboard made its appearance. Elsewhere on the human rights front, some rays of light shone in as the White House legalized gay marriage and Nigeria banned female genital mutilation. But that's not to say that all was perfect in 2015. This also represented a time when 20 to 30 million people worldwide were considered enslaved, and that is more than at any other time in human history. For the first time since the Second World War, the number of refugees displaced by conflict reached 50 million. The Middle East crisis and the caliphate waged by the Islamic extremist group Iraq, ISIS, was destabilizing and taking over Syria and Iraq. And the question of whether gender disparity was really truly still an issue still plagued the minds of many, despite the fact that a woman could not necessarily be paid the same amount as a male counterpart for performing the same job. In fact, being born with a chromosomal set of XX meant that you were not necessarily guaranteed the right to an education, the right to your very own body, or even, tragically in some cases, the right to live. Elsewhere, people were still questioning whether climate change was a real thing, and I guess we all remember how that turned out. Meanwhile, adorably, Donald Trump still thought he would make a legitimate leader of the free world. That was the world in 2015. And then things got weird. In 2018, that long, slow evolutionary march that we all long suspected was happening, but we're never really sure was quite real anyways, finally happened, and the iPad and the iPhone became the same device. And then things escalated. By 2019, instability in the Middle East reached a head, and the caliphate waged by ISIS continued on, and we decided to call a spade, realizing that already at this point, Canada, US, UK, Germany, Australia, Syria, Iraq, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE were already involved, so we called a spade, and that was the beginning of the Third World War. And just as we had at the beginning of the Second World War, we waited and waited for someone on the other side to say, guys, maybe we're taking this too far. But of course no one did, and when the war finally spilled over into Turkey, we could no longer deny the moral imperative to act. Because millions were dying, children were being used as instruments of war, refugees were being displaced, women were being raped. And miraculously, we managed to avert a global nuclear holocaust as Iran chose to sit most of this one out because they were still trying to abide by the stringent dictations of the 2015 US nuclear disarmament deal. So thanks, Obama. And I won't rehash all of the details here because Fox and CNN already did a wonderful job of that with better music and sound effects. But I just want to reiterate the turning point of the war. Because despite the bombs and the drones and the tanks and the soldiers, it was the women of Islam who represented the turning point of the war. It was the women of Islam who launched an anti-caliphate of their own, the women of Islam who said, enough, that we will no longer have you take our rights away, that we will no longer watch our husbands and sons being killed and watch our daughters be abducted or worse. And just as ISIS represented a distributed, underground, hard-to-pinpoint network, so too became the women of Islam. And they became the eyes and the ears of the allies on the ground, tracking the movements and plans of their enemy. And in so doing, this new breed of counterinsurgency became the undoing of ISIS. And that was the turning point of the war. And by 2024, we had reached a new level of stability and a modicum of democracy in the Middle East. And that was a victory for women, for Islam, and for humanity. Elsewhere, across the pond, 2024 also represented a major transportation milestone. The 3D traffic grid took off in a very real way, and suddenly the Jetsons were a reality centuries ahead of schedule. Meanwhile, back on terra firma, autonomous vehicles for the first time surpassed the number of human-driven cars, and suddenly it was possible to drive to work, fit in a morning snooze, have your morning breakfast, read a newspaper, and if you owned the deluxe edition, work out in the gym in the back as well. Elsewhere in human milestones, 2029 represented the year that space exploration really took off, if you know what I'm saying. And just as Arthur C. Clarke had predicted years and years earlier, in 2022 the Chinese space station was put into orbit. And then, on October 1st, 2029, they took off towards the two moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, spurring the next great space race. But it was what happened next that was truly a testament to human courage and triumph and civility. Because when the Chinese space station ran into technical difficulties in low Martian orbit, the world mounted a rescue mission, the likes of which had never been seen before. Led by SpaceX and the private sphere and all the world's leading space agencies, we reached the Chinese space station and then made the bold decision to continue on. And it was linked arm in arm that the commanders of each space party set foot on Mars, echoing those now immortal first words on that planet, in Mandarin and in English. 我们一起chung chung. Together we achieved. And that was the catalyst for space exploration. By 2034, we'd established a fully functional, thriving lunar outpost, and that was the catalyst for second-generation astronauts, for explorers, for miners, for settlers, and of course, professional microgravity athletes. Children now dreamed of growing up to be the next generation professional Quidditch or high-altitude hockey player. And in 2039, we had a permanent multicultural Martian outpost. This was a springboard towards the rest of the solar system, the stars, and more importantly, the asteroids where precious metals lay. And when 2042 arrived, we did it. We successfully mined the first asteroid. And suddenly, iridium and gold and platinum became the new aluminum. Meanwhile, back on Earth, things were also changing, but not necessarily for the better. 2059 represented the year that our population finally reached 10 billion. And the climate also did what we pretended in 2015 it never could and would do. The climate spiraled out of control, the polar ice caps melted, the polar bears drowned, the sea levels rose, the lakes dried up, and suddenly land and water became the new platinum. And that's how the Fourth World War began. I know. We said we would never let it happen again, that after the Third Great War we had learned our lesson, we would never again let that amount of bloodshed and violence erupt at a global scale. But then time passed, memories faded, and all we could remember was that 40 years prior, something important had been learned, but we couldn't quite remember what. And then somebody, we think it was a scientist, stood up and said, listen, we tried to warn you about climate change earlier, you ignored us, you have to listen now. He may or may not have thrown an I told you so in there. And the same scientist said, look, we have a choice. We can continue to wage war with our dwindling water and land, or we can do what humans do best when faced with constraint and duress. We can innovate. And for perhaps the first time in human history, when faced with the prospect of cooperate or die, we did something reasonable. We cooperated. It worked, and it only took us 4 great wars to figure that out. And now out of one of the greatest calamities that had yet to threaten human survival on this planet came some of our greatest innovations. We had 10 billion people and no space, so we made space. We colonized the ocean floors, we built our cities way up into the stratosphere, which worked because the traffic grids were already there. Vertical farming, which had made its previous appearance a century earlier, suddenly became the only way to farm. And finally, because we had no choice, we managed to unlock and achieve desalination at a large scale for low cost, and suddenly we had water again. We also placed a moratorium on the burning of fossil fuels because we had no choice. And somehow, we managed to scrape by with only solar, wind, hydroelectric, hydrothermal, geothermal, algae, nuclear, cold fusion, and hydrokinetic energy to rely on. And with this energy revolution came one of our greatest changes in currencies. I mean, it had all been Bitcoin anyway since 2032, but even now that seemed frivolous. And we resorted to trading in currencies of energy, time, contribution to society, and of course, creativity. And as this dependence on physical objects became impossible, as the cost of emissions and physical space that it took to manufacture dwindled, our world became one that relied entirely on holograms and artificial reality. Suddenly, schools, cafes, churches, and meeting spaces all became virtual. Paperback novels and museums became unicorns. And that's how 50 Shades of Grey ended up in the Louvre. In the space between 2059 and 2074, we pulled the undergraduate equivalent of an all-nighter and achieved in 15 years what we once had decades to sort out. And all it cost us was 1 billion lives, the ability to go outside without thermal protection, and all the world's pandas, polar bears, giraffes, sharks, whales, koala bears, and mosquitoes. So there's that silver lining. Meanwhile, in medicine, by 2085, we had a lot of things figured out. In 2015, HIV/AIDS was a chronic disease. By 2025, it was a memory. Cancer followed suit in 2033, and so did the common cold by 2040. And then in 2063, one of the most revolutionary advances yet was achieved in medicine. The Nobel Prize that year went to the OBGYNs because babies were finally born with instruction manuals. And with all these afflictions and pathologies fading from memory, medicine suddenly moved from being a catch and cure profession to one of enhancement and augmentation. In 2071, we managed to reverse aging. I recently celebrated my 131st birthday, and believe me, I don't feel a day over 31. By 2074, it became completely commonplace to go to your doctor for a prescription for photographic memory, superhuman speed, or Hulk strength. It wasn't cheap, of course, and this began the great divide between meat and bones humans and their hybrid enhanced counterparts. And we all remember the great debate that raged when unenhanced and enhanced wanted to marry and interbreed. And then in 2091, things really got crazy when the artificial intelligence robots wanting to marry humans, whether enhanced or not, also wanted to marry. And it was like the 2015 gay marriage debate all over again, with most of us asking, why is this even a question? In 2099, there was a very brief but very real moment of panic when we realized we had forgotten to program our holographic computers to a 4-digit year system, and Y2K 99 became a very real possibility, threatening to take us back to the dark ages, back to the days of early internet, back to the pre-smartphone era that was the year 2000. Luckily, it was a false alarm and we all partied like it was 2099. By 2108, we had found a new normal. Government was global but not yet interplanetary. Advertisements, information, internet, education, communication was beamed directly to our brains. The job economy was such that you could only get paid for innovation, creativity, and discovery. You were either a scientist, an artist, a retiree, or a never before worked, because all the other jobs belonged to the robots, and bot help you if you tried to take a job from a robot because the robots had damn good unions. And that brings us to 2111, the year that our 150-year quest to look for intelligent life elsewhere in the universe finally came to an end. We captured and verified a sequence of increasing prime numbers, and it came from nowhere sooner than our nearest stellar neighbor at Alpha Centauri, a mere 4.36 light years away. There is intelligent life in the universe. They're in our own stellar backyard, and apparently they read Carl Sagan and watched Contact as well. We responded in kind, and that was 4 years ago. And if you do the math, we should be getting a response this coming week. Here's to the next 100 years.